Into the 10th chapter of the Gita. And Arjuna has just asked Krishna in text 18, please again describe in detail the mystic power of your opulences. I'm never satiated in hearing about you, for the more I hear, the more I want to taste the nectar of your words. And how shall I constantly think of you? How shall I know you? In what various forms are you to be remembered? So we spent some time warming up to this question over the last couple of weeks. We spent some considerable time warming up to this question. Krishna's gone on I was going to say on quite a rant, but it's probably not the language I should choose. Krishna has given quite the monologue over the last 4 or 5 chapters. And he's really begun to separate himself from Arjuna, point out his divinity, say that he's God, tell Arjuna to be his devotee, tell Arjuna that bhakti is the way, the truth, and the light. The way, the truth, and the life. It's funny when no one goes back to the Father except through me. It's a statement from the book of John. I think it's probably the most exclusivistic statement in the whole New Testament. The book of John is different than the 3 other major Gospels. It tells a totally different story. It was written much later. It has a much different feel to it. It doesn't tell the story just of Jesus's life and times, going through the same events that the Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. It kind of goes off on a different spin. It's much more preachy. It's much less of a narrative story. If you read it and compare it to the other 3 what are called synoptic Gospels that tell the same story. And then it makes this exclusivistic statement that we're the only way. And like the exclusivism of Christianity, that this is it, that, nobody gets back to God except through Jesus, that Jesus is the only way. That whole movement usually gets hung on this statement. Does that make sense? Jesus was a Jew. He quotes the Torah. So given that he quotes the Torah, he would have spoken Hebrew. He went to synagogues. He was an actual practicing Jew. Nazarene, Essene. Nazarene, he's called Jesus of Nazareth. He's called a Nazarene Jew. was a particular sect of Judaism. He's called that in the book of Acts. And then he was baptized, which was an Essene practice, which is another sect of Judaism, where you take a ritual bath as part of your ordination. So anyway, either way you slice it, he was an esoteric Jew from an ascetic sect of Judaism, more of a renunciate sect of Judaism, an offshoot sect of Judaism. It was outside of the mainstream of Judaism, of the Pharisees, of the Orthodox Jews in his time. And but this statement is used then to say that you can only get back to God through following Christianity, which became a whole different religion than the religion Jesus himself practiced while he was on the planet. And it seems like as one of my elders said, a thin peg to hang the massive exclusivism that has defined Christianity for thousands of years. This single statement becomes the justification for all of that. But I'll say that bhakti is the only way. And I don't think I'm being a fanatic Christian or the equivalent, the Hindu equivalent of a fanatic Christian when I say bhakti is the only way. No one goes back to Krishna except through bhakti. I don't think that that's a fanatic statement. I don't think that that's an unreasonable statement. I think that's an obvious statement. I think it's a necessary statement. I do not find it to be judgmental or exclusivistic when I say that no one goes back to God except through bhakti. Do you guys follow this? Why do I feel so confident, that I can critique Christianity? I mean, I would give you guys a little bit of history of Christianity and that text, how it shaped Christian thought. But why do I feel so confident critiquing that, but yet being comfortable saying that bhakti is the only way? Narayana?
Well, there's only one verse where it says that Jesus is the only way, as opposed to bhakti.
Okay, fair enough. So there's the one verse where Jesus says, "No one go back to the Father except through me." And then their whole religion, which was a spin-off of the religion that would have been practiced while Jesus was on the planet, to then say that's the only way, it doesn't make any sense because it was only said in one place, and things became so strange, and they spun off so much from that one direction. Whereas Krishna over and over again says, bhakti is the only way. Fair enough. So maybe the Bible isn't really so fanatic after all. It's just the lame Christians who don't follow it properly and overly emphasize one verse. But in contrast, Krishna consciousness or the Gita is actually fanatic. And so I can still believe in the Bible, but reject the modern day Christian's weird interpretation of a single verse. Whereas I have to just reject the Gita outright because it's filled with such fanaticism from beginning to the end. Did you follow that? Okay. So if that's the reason, then I'm saying, hey, Christianity isn't so bad. The Bible's not so bad, but these weird Christians mess the whole thing up. However, the Gita is actually that bad. Why do I feel comfortable saying bhakti is the only way? The only way. Bhakti is the only way. Yeah, am loud and proud, like the Jewish person that we are.
In a sense, bhakti is
You don't sound like you believe yourself. You sound like you're doubting yourself while you're speaking. People from other religions can practice bhakti. I don't know, can they? Bhakti is more general. People from other religions could theoretically practice bhakti. See how when you change the way you say it, it sounds more authoritative? Bhakti is generic. People from other religions could, in fact, practice bhakti. They could do it. Bhakti is not sectarian. See that? If you just believe it, I think I can. You just believe it, and you fake it till you make it. Say it with some conviction. Jesus is the only way. Bhakti is the only way. Whoever has more gusto and moxie and confidence, then they win the argument. Yeah, the idea of bhakti is cross-cultural. You could be a Christian and have bhakti. You could be a Jew and have bhakti. It really is equivalent to saying by grace, by surrendering to divinity, by being slain in the Spirit, to use Pentecostal language. Slain in the Spirit. That's where the Christians faint, make a big scene, flop around like a fish, and faint. They're slain in the Spirit. That's just a straight element of shamanism that came over from Africa. You know? It's just like the voodoo of Haiti and stuff like that stuff, and Santeria and all that stuff. That's African. Only 400,000 to 12 million slaves came. 12 million slaves came from Africa to the U.S. 2 million of them just died on the way. It was not an easy journey. Or they might have died while they were being seasoned, which was the term used for when the slaves were taken to the Caribbean and those type of countries, and they were put to work on farms for a period of years where they were stripped of their culture, stripped of their language, and their will was broken, and they got used to the bugs and heat and humidity, and that was more specific to the equatorial region they were finding themselves in. Once they'd been seasoned, they were then sold off into slavery because the rates of death would be very high if they were just directly sold into slavery. They had to acclimate. It's like it was hot today. I got sunstroke. It was a weird sunstroke because normally when I get sunstroke, I get a headache. But I didn't get a headache this time. I got just extremely tired because I properly covered my head and had sunglasses on, so it didn't kill my eyes, didn't kill my head. And it was just the actual sheer heat of the sun. I worked out in the sun, and it was just. But then it was the first really hot day, in probably this year, to be honest. And so, yeah, you get used to things. If you live in the cold, you get a little tougher. You live in the heat, you get a little tougher. But it takes time to acclimate. Become you're going to be just naturally tougher, having lived in Texas. But after a couple of years here, you will have become weak, like the rest of us Californians. It's a weird thing. You don't think you can toughen up, and you don't think you become weak. But your body just acclimates and just becomes used to what you're exposed to. So pretty soon it's like, oh my God, It's 55. I'm dying. I'm so cold. Or it's 50. I'm just frozen. Frozen Part 3. And then it's 85. I'm dying. I'm dying. Whereas in other countries where it's 100 and humid, other places where it's 100 and humid, 85 is nothing. So anyway, the slaves had to be seasoned, which is the term that was used, which is somewhat diabolical, that language. And then, the majority of those slaves, 9.5 million of them, went to Belize and Guyana and Brazil and stayed in the Caribbean and Jamaica and Trinidad, et cetera, Colombia. That's why there's so many black people in those countries. There's not a ton of black people in Chile. Not a ton of black people in Ecuador or Peru or Mexico. It's all on the eastern seaboard. Do you guys follow this? They brought their practices with them. And that's Haiti, and the voodoo from Haiti, and Santeria. There's so many black Cubans. It's alongside there. And so, so many black Bahamians, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that's slain in the spirit when people get touched and they fall down on the ground speaking in tongues and flailing about with these really sensationalized displays of religious conversion and devotion and Jesus like living in them, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit living in them, expressing itself through them. That's all shamanism. That's all straight African religion that got syncretized with Christianity, because the slaves didn't just become Christians, they became Christians and also brought some of their own practices to the equation. Some Christians really hate that stuff because they think it's antithetical or incompatible with the Christianity that they were raised with. Catholics, for instance, aren't so. Catholics actually, they have something called adaptation, where they welcome the religious holidays, Cinco de Mayo, etc., of native traditions, and they incorporate them into Catholicism. Easter, Christmas, the pagan holidays, and so many indigenous holidays, they'll incorporate them to make it that you have to spend less cultural capital to become a Christian. Let's say you were raised with an indigenous, it's hard to imagine this. You have to be smart enough to go back in time a little bit. You look bewildered. Try to pay attention. You have to go back in time a little bit. But imagine you were raised with a Nordic religion, or a Druidic religion, or a pagan religion, or an indigenous Mayan religion, or whatever it was. And then the Catholics came along, and they said, hey, all your holy days are bogus. What you spent your whole life doing, bogus. Can't do it anymore. Got to become a Christian. Not only are we going to give you a little cool cross to wear, but you got to learn a totally different language. Whole thing is in Latin now. And all your previous rituals and holies and everything, they all have to be rejected. We tried to do this, Catholics tried to do this in India. There, most people don't know this, but there's a relatively large Christian contingent on the western seaboard of India. When you go around not Cape Cameron, when you go around the Horn of Africa, before they built the Suez Canal. Thank you guys. I was doubting myself for a second. What's the canal in the U.S.? Jeez, I'm like really showing myself to be a moron. I thought Suez. I thought, no, that's the one in the U.S. I was trying to think of the name for the one in the U.S. so I could go back to Suez because I had nothing else up my sleeve. So the Suez Canal allows you to get through the Mediterranean into the Indian Ocean. Previously, it was landlocked. And so they had to find this little thin point and then join the two oceans together. The same thing in Panama, the thinnest point between, so that you could get from the Pacific to the Atlantic, same thing from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. So before there was a Suez Canal, if you wanted to get to India, you had to sail all the way around the Horn of Africa. And then you'd rip up past Mauritius and then to India. That's, by the way, why Mauritius has a ton of Indians and a ton of black people, because it's sort of equidistant between Africa and India. And so the trade routes just carried people freely back and forth. You guys following this? So, as the Indian ships were going up to Kerala, which is on the western seaboard of India, South India, they brought their religion with them. And so there's a bunch of Catholics down there. They've had, minimal success in India. If you look at Catholicism, Catholicism's not native to South America. Catholicism is only 500 years old in Mexico and Central and South America. But how common is Catholicism in Mexico, which is North America, and Central and South America? It's extremely common. They were successful. They were successful in Africa. Christians, maybe not so much Catholics. Some Catholics, some Protestants. But they weren't so successful in India. Anyway, they tried to get the different castes to give up their casteism, because it was deemed by the popes, the papacy, and Christian ideals that casteism was wrong. So they told the converted Catholics that you have to eat together on feast days for Christian saints with other castes at the church on those sacred festival days where you break bread. And we have to be communal, and we have to get rid of casteism. You following this? And when they did that, all the Catholics from India just converted back to Hinduism. The idea of eating with people from other castes was so obscene that people just converted back to Hinduism. It's just like, I can't do it. And the Pope had to write a special decree allowing, I think it was in the 1700s maybe, 1800s. He had to write a special decree allowing for the Hindus to keep following the caste system who became Catholics, because it was just too much capital to require people to spend to become Christians, where they had to give up their deeply held multi-thousand-year belief system that had been ingrained in them. And so Catholics have long been adapting and adopting, adoption, I can't remember what the actual term that's used is, but they try to make it as easy as possible to become a Catholic. And so they'll incorporate your holy day. That's Christmas. They'll incorporate your holy day. That's Easter. Ooster. That's either you're taking pagan holidays and you're combining them with Catholicism. That's Cinco de Mayo, and why Catholics think it's okay to follow Cinco de Mayo. And so Christianity has long been syncretistically allowing for people to bring their own stuff, and then sometimes theologians will say, no, this is totally incompatible. But you got to be careful, because if you do something stupid like the Hare Krishnas and say, hey, we have a whole different thing going on. Shave your head, wear a sari, put on tilak, wear a dhoti, worship deities. It just makes it so hard for people to do what you're doing. It's too many things they have to change. Fortunately for us, there was a brief blip in time where the more freaky you were, the better it was. Prabhupada happened to come to the U.S. at this perfect moment when there was this massive counterculture movement, and the weirder you were, the cooler you were. And then therefore the things we asked people to do, it actually made us more attractive. Like dress myself in bed sheets and paint my face like an Indian and shave my head, but leave a tuft of hair in the back of my head like a Thai boxer, and then jump around in public. Like, okay, sign me up. Oh, I get to live in an ashram too and sleep on the floor and eat off a wax paper? Sure, okay. And so there was this brief moment in time where the exoticness of our tradition became a selling point. Yeah, so that was all a tangent off of the shamanism. So, but you guys don't wonder at some point, did I do all of that knowingly? Or did I just get lucky? You guys will wonder that in a minute. You'll see. So, you're slain in the spirit. It's African religion. You got to be careful what you ask people to do. You don't want them to spend too much cultural capital. When you say to somebody that bhakti is not exclusivistic, what you really mean is that bhakti is a tradition of grace. It's a tradition of allowing yourself to be overwhelmed with the grace of an all-good, all-powerful deity, and that's the only way you can truly go back to heaven, because you can't build a stairway to heaven. You can't just do it all on your own. It's not that you're so marvelous and that's why you go back to heaven. It's that God's so kind and merciful and you acquiesce to that. In that sense, bhakti is no longer a sect. Bhakti is it's an idea about the nature of the soul's relationship with divinity. And you could call God by another name, you could call bhakti by another name, but the core would be there. That's not true with Christianity. It's the historical figure Jesus, or the archetypal version of them they invented posthumously, that you have to accept in order to be a Christian. Whereas somebody could be a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, and we could be like, oh, they're a bhakta. And that wouldn't be obscene. Whereas you couldn't say that somebody was a Christian or Muslim or Jew and they were a Christian. Now the Pope, recently Pope Francis said, he picked the best name for a Pope. Francis is the best name. If I ever became a Pope, I would call myself Pope Francis. It's the coolest name out there for popes. Unless I could be like Pope Krishnadas, something like that. I don't know how much power the Pope holds, but so if I could do anything, I'd do something like that. But barring that, if I had to roll with tradition. Pope Francis was a cool person. The Pope said, 5 years ago or so, he said that Christ redeemed everyone, including Muslims and Jews, as well as Christians. And the media freaked out. They're like, we finally have ourselves a gay, loving, ecumenical, pluralist, that's more than one way back to God, Pope. The world's changed. Because Jesus redeemed even the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews. And the Hindus. I think he mentioned the Hindus too. And so people thought, wow, this means that Pope Francis, believes that everybody can go back to heaven, not just Christians. Which is a huge idea and flies in the face of, 1,800 years of Catholicism. You follow this? Scholars were just quick to dismiss the idea, and they said, no, you have to understand the difference between redemption and salvation in Catholicism. When Christ died, he paid for the sins, but if you actually want to go back to heaven, you have to be saved, not merely redeemed. Christ redeemed you. He paid your debt. He ransomed you back, or I don't know what their theory is. I don't know if it's a ransom or a substitution theory. Or there's a number of different theories about what exactly was occurring when Jesus died. And they have various names for what exactly was going on. I don't want to get into a discussion of the various strands of theories, but all of them hold that you committed a bunch of sins. The wages of sin is death. You were going to go to hell. The devil owned you. And that Jesus either had to substitute himself for you or he had to ransom you back from the devil and trick the devil. There's a few different versions of this. They're not consistent with an all-good and all-powerful God. They leave the law as being more powerful than the deity. They're incongruent with an actual tradition of grace because they hold that the law is greater than mercy. And so I think that they don't work philosophically. But, when's that stopped a religion from moving forward? And so whatever the theory was, Christ redeemed us. He paid our debt. He got us a pass. If you want to go back to heaven and be saved and you want salvation, then you have to go an extra step. So when Francis said Christ redeemed everyone, the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims 3 times, and the Hindus, he was just saying what Christians have been saying forever. For 1,500 years or so. The word redemption is actually an English word. It's one of the only English words in the core glossary of terms used within Catholicism. And so, when he said that, you're redeemed, he just meant that you have a chance. But you still have to go for it and accept Jesus in order to actually go back to heaven. Therefore, he wasn't saying something non-exclusivistic. He was just being exclusivistic in a way that was only a dog whistle to the people who actually knew Catholicism. But to the masses, even a bunch of Catholics, he was being incredibly ecumenical and broad-minded and avant-garde and pluralistic and all good things. And you had to actually know Catholic theology to realize he wasn't saying anything special. Do you guys follow this? Now, exclusivism wasn't that much cultural capital even 50 years ago in this country. They did a poll in USA Today in the 70s and another poll in the early, I don't know what you call the last 10 years. It was the aughts were the 2000 to 2010. I guess it's the teens. What is it? What are we in now? Have we named this last decade? I'm sure they did. I'm sure pundits have had the name the last decade. We just don't know what that name is. It took me a few years, so we're in aughts. From 2000 to 2010 is now called the aughts. I think it ought not to have been called that. It doesn't quite make sense to me. But I can't think of a better term since I've had to learn it. The tens. the 1910s, right? Otherwise, it has to be the 19 teens. That doesn't work. The 2010s, that's probably what it is. The 20s doesn't work, but the 2010s does. The 10s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, that's what we call in the 19th century. So we'll probably start calling this one the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. I was thinking, you guys are really going to be wondering in a minute. I was thinking earlier today, I was doing the RT, and I was just pacing back and forth in the temple room and chanting some japa. And I was thinking, I've been serving here for 22 years. I was thinking what the next 22 years are going to look like and the things we have to accomplish in the next 22 years here. And the things I want to get done here for the deities and all the wonderful stuff that I'd like to see happen for Krishna consciousness and actually for the deities to really be served nicely, and for the mission to really have taken a strong hold. And how I've been lounging for the last 22, and I got to really get my act together and do something big. Because I'll be 70 in 22 years. I'm 48. So I was thinking, the next I'm halfway through. By the time I'm 70, I'll have to turn the reins over to somebody else. It might be sooner than that. We'll see. Whatever Krishna wants, I'm going to do. Whatever the deities want, I'm going to do. But I'd like a chance to do something big for them. Spend a couple more decades here doing stuff for them. And I was thinking, what that would look like. Buying some property, rebuilding the building, programs all over the place. Big outreach, and hundreds of initiated devotees. I had some, huge congregation. I had some plans, for what we want to accomplish. Satellites all over Southern California. Other temples all over Southern California. A real mission. Really do something amazing in Southern California for the deities, for Panchatattva. And I just, I thought about it. I thought about, this is, my life will be over soon. And, I want to do something while I'm here. But, in the grand scheme of things, what I really want to have happen is I want that long after I'm dead, the deities are here. They have a beautiful, I'm dead, but their footprint and their home here on PCH. PCH will outlive me. You follow? The Pacific Ocean's going to outlive me. PCH is going to outlive me. The town Laguna is going to outlive me. So I want the deities to have really something nice here. We paid off the mortgage, we did some other stuff. I really want the deities to have something amazing here. That's what I want to do with my life. That's my aspiration. And I was thinking, I have a small window in time, but I want to be part of something which is much bigger than myself. You follow this? So I was thinking like that, earlier today. And in the temple while I was sitting. And so here we go now. Here we go now. The exclusivism of Christianity was attractive to tribalistic people who anyway hated their enemies and warred with their enemies, like the Bedouins. And so the Middle Eastern people were these warring factions and tribes. So then you come up with a religion that's exclusivistic, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense to us. Just like 50 years ago in the U.S., The idea that Jesus was the only way made sense to most people. USA Today had done a poll in the 70s. They redid the poll in the early 2010s, and they found that the whole mood had shifted. And now if you want to say that Jesus was the only way, you're fighting an uphill battle, because most people in the U.S. think that idea is weird. Used to be to go, you haven't accepted Jesus, you're going to hell. And people would be like, yeah. And if you're like, I don't agree with that, you'd have to argue, because everybody believed that. Nowadays, you're like, you're going to hell if you don't believe Jesus. People will laugh at you. We don't want to spend that much cultural capital. And sometimes cultural values shift, and the zeitgeist of one generation is different than the zeitgeist of another. And religions that want to make it easy to jump in, they have to be able to adapt and incorporate different stuff. But the very nature of religion is you're trying to deal with perennial philosophy. And so you have this dexterous dance you have to do between what is modern and easy and what gets you, like makes it like okay, and what popularizes you, and what honors your tradition. And you don't want to lose the baby with the bathwater. And so if you start jumping and running every time a new ism comes out, and every time something is popular for 5 minutes, you destroy your religion by the death of 1,000 cuts. At the same time, if you're so immobile that you don't adapt at all, you become so difficult to jump into that no one joins your tradition, and your tradition dies an ignoble death because it only has like 5 people to follow it, because it's so arcane that nobody can relate to it. And religions have to jump between those more flexible structures and those more immovable structures. Because the very reason people are interested in religion is because they provide them with some kind of bulwark against the ever-changing time. You follow this? And so when you step back and you look at the history of the world and you look at the history of ideas, you start to locate yourself, just like I did in my time in this temple. You start to locate yourself and you think, where do I fit into all this? How can I participate in all this? There's something much bigger than what I'm thinking that's going on. I like exclusivist religion. I like pluralistic religion. But we never step back and go like, why do some people like this and some people like that? It's not just your tastes. It's the way you've been programmed by the milieu that you were raised in. You guys following this? And those milieus change over time. And those mores change over time, not just based on where you were born, but also the time in which you were born, where you were born, and what was prominent. And we have to figure out a way to adapt and change and adjust without losing the core of who we are. Bhakti is the core of who we are. Exclusivism might be the core of Christianity. It's a lousy exclusivism. It's a lousy thing to have the core be of a religion. Because it leads to this idea that what if you loved God with your heart, but you were born on a desert island and you never heard of Jesus? Then you go to hell automatically. And you got to come up with all these ideas of purgatory, and people preach to you about Jesus in purgatory. And then you have a chance, or posthumously you get a chance. I mean, there's all sorts of things you have to get creative with. It really just makes no sense. They become these additional, it's like an additional limb or an appendage, like an appendix that you don't really need. It just gets thrown in the mix. We don't know what appendixes do. You seem to be able to remove them from someone's body without any problem whatsoever. We don't know what they originally were for. Maybe we needed something that you could cut out of a person. So Krishna gave us an appendix so we could cut one out. They don't really have any value that we were aware of. There's a bunch of theories, but nobody knows. So it becomes almost like this appendix, this extra appendage you have to add on to account for weird stuff, because it just doesn't make sense that God would be exclusivistic. And if you didn't believe in Middle Eastern religion and a historical figure, you couldn't love him. And just surrendering to Jesus wouldn't be enough. And so the slain in the spirit shamanic idea coming out of Africa, giving yourself over to a higher power, although we might not agree with the materialism of the shamanic rituals and how they were really just designed to help people win in battle and stuff like that, which was also what Christianity was originally. That's how it spread. Constantine prayed to Jesus and won and figured, okay, this has to be the way it is. They used to call it King Christ conquered death. And so if you follow Christ, you'll also conquer. It's how we preached in Germania. It's how we preached in Great Britain. It's how we got popular, because we had a violent, angry Jesus who couldn't be killed even by death, who stepped on the head of death, who conquered death. That idea is still there in the Orthodox Church. You'll never see Jesus on a cross in the Orthodox Church. That was a Catholic thing, the Passion and Jesus dying on the cross. That was their own thing. We think that's Christianity, but actually there's other versions where the crucifix and his crucifixion isn't the thing. It's his power that becomes the thing, not his suffering. His suffering got poeticized in this masochistic, weird stigmata type thing people really got into in the Middle Ages. Orthodox Christianity just doesn't have it. You will practically not find an Orthodox church, hundreds of millions of Christians, where Jesus is on a cross being crucified. You guys following us? So, Bhakti is cross-cultural. The slain in the spirit can be traced back to Africa. Grace can be traced to the core of Christianity. It's there for the Jews, at least some of them, the Nazarenes, the Essenes, the tribes that Jesus is identified with in the New Testament itself. Bhakti doesn't have to be said in Sanskrit. It could be said in another language. Why not? It's a global idea about the nature of reality. It's this bigger idea. It's what happens when you step back from it and you stop thinking about, my ism versus your ism, or do you accept my historical figure? Bhakti's not a small idea like that. It's a big idea. And therefore we can say that the Gita preaches that Bhakti is the only way, and we're not just doing the same thing that the Christians do. Do you guys follow that? And now here's another big idea about the nature of reality. It's foreign, it's difficult, it requires a little bit of cultural capital. It doesn't make sense to you because God is identifying himself with things in this world. But if you step back from the fact that this is an old idea and you're able to give up your limited, like I'm in this world at this time, you're able to see the bigger picture, you'll be able to see the value in what Krishna does in this chapter. There's a thing called Scala Naturae. Aristotle talked about it. Dionysius talked about it. The Areopagites, and it's there all over the alchemical tradition. It's there all over the Middle Ages. It's this idea that when you look at the world, you look for a natural order or a sacred order or a divine order. You're looking for a Fibonacci sequence. You're looking for some golden ratio. When they fix women's eyebrows, they have a golden ratio they use for how big the arch should be. That adds symmetry to a person's face. I guess they do it for men too. I'm being racist. Men are just as vain as women. They do this kind of stuff too. So we're always looking for these ratios in nature, in arithmetic, in mathematics. We're looking for these numbers, these ideas of a snowflake structure, blah, 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 blah. We're looking for this stuff because we're looking for some kind of order. It's our nature. When we look at things, we organize it. Because if we don't organize it, we die. Even from an evolutionary point of view, if you can't recognize patterns, you die. It's why we're subjected to optical illusions. You'll see something, but you'll see the same color, but if it's divided up, you see different colors because your mind isn't made to not see patterns. You have to recognize patterns. And so sometimes the optical illusion will be they'll suggest a pattern, but there isn't actually a pattern, and you fill in the blanks. And you can't unsee it. Sometimes even the optical illusion, you still can't unsee it. There's a number of optical illusions like that, or auditory illusions, where even if you know the illusion is there, you still can't unsee it. It's wild. Researchers get into this. It teaches you a lot about the structure of our brain and the way we think and the way we're designed. Now there's a whole subjectivist movement where you try to say there is no order, there is no design. And any attempt, in a postmodern way, any attempt for white European settlers to try to figure out native traditions and indigenous traditions is ridiculous. Those native traditions live in their own world. And the best thing you can do is immerse yourself in that culture and not bring your own baggage to it. And there's value in that, to learn to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes and see what they're seeing in the world. But in a fundamental sense, we're all looking at the world and trying to figure it out and make sense out of it. And so if you want to see the world in relationship to the divinity, and you want to see the world in relationship to the divine, to divinity, and you don't want to become bewildered when you look at the world, and you want to actually find value in the world and be able to connect it to God, so when you see beautiful people, you don't get lusty, but you're actually filled with veneration. And when you see beautiful things, you don't become greedy, but you're actually filled with gratitude and veneration. There's a way to crack the code. It's not just a white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, European, Occidental look at an indigenous religion. You find this natural order is basic to human beings. It's what we do when we land anywhere at any time. We try to figure out what's going on around us so we can survive, so we can thrive, so we can make sense out of things, so we can not reinvent the wheel, so we can pass on the lessons we've learned to our loved ones. And so bizarrely, what was going on in medieval Europe, what was going on for Aristotle in Greece, what was going on for Aristotle in Greece, what was going on in the 5th century in Syria, what was going on in the Middle Ages, what was going on in the alchemical tradition, what was going on in Christianity, thousands of years ago was also going on in India. And Arjuna wanted to look at the world and see Krishna everywhere, and Krishna responded by saying this. It's all going to sound weird, but if you understand the desire to find divinity in every aspect of reality, you'll be able to appreciate this. And Krishna said, I will tell you of my opulent manifestations, but only those which are prominent, for my opulence is limitless. I will tell you about how you can see me in this world, but I'm not going to tell you everything because there's no end to how much I'm in this world. I watched a debate with an atheist and a Christian at Oxford University, moderated by some idiot, and the idiot said to the two guys who are actually scholars within their respective worldviews, he said, what's the single greatest evidence for God's existence? And the Christian just stopped him and said, hey, the evidence for God's existence is everywhere for me, and the evidence that God doesn't exist is everywhere for him. And the atheist was like, actually, he's right. It was a dumb question. And then they kind of had their debate, and the moderator just had to be quiet because his attempt to figure out what to ask them, he was just making it more difficult for them to express their worldviews. And they knew how to debate with each other without the moderator better than he, who was ignorant and just a TV personality. He wasn't able to guide them. He wasn't smart enough to guide the debate. You follow this? So Krishna's everywhere. Krishna's everywhere. I'm the super soul, seated in the hearts of all living entities. Boom. I'm your conscience. I'm everywhere. I'm in every living entity. Heck, I'm in every atom. That's a big one. It's a big opening gambit. Big opening salvo. Big shot across the bow. I'm the beginning, middle, and end of all things. That's like the alpha and the omega. Just done. Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. Right? You have alpha males, beta males, and omega males. The omegas are like the lowest rung. They're eating the scraps. If you understand something about like the structure of wolf society, primatological societies, and we're primates, by the way. I'm the beginning, middle, and end of all things. Of the Adityas, I am Vishnu. Of the sons of the sons of Aditi. Kashyap had two wives, Diti and Aditi. The Adityas are the demigods. So amongst the demigods, I am Vishnu. Vishnu is the supreme lord, but he also lives amongst the demigods as one of them. Sort of incognito, like Krishna played with his family members in the most intimate corner of heaven. In the larger universe of heaven, Vishnu lives as one of the Adityas. Of the Adityas, I am Vishnu. Of lights, I am the sun. Of the Maruts, I am Marichi. The Maruts are the wind gods, and Marichi is one of them. And among the stars, I am the moon. Now, it's important to understand, amongst luminaries, I'm the moon. The moon's not actually like a star per se. But amongst the luminous objects you see when you look up in the sky, there's like these little stars. But then there's like the moon. The moon's like 1 billion stars. It's so much cooler. Gives so much more light, so much more valuable to us. obviously, Krishna here is speaking in a worldview where people know who the Adityas are, they know who the Maruts are, blah, 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 blah. We might not know all that. Yeah, so we might not know all that, but we do know. I mean, imagine if you was to say, you know, I am the lightning bolt of Zeus. I'm the hammer of Thor. You follow? Does that make sense? I'm the all-seeing eye of Odin. You understand? It doesn't matter what tradition you're in. I'm the singularity of the Big Bang. I'm the principle of survival that's in all life. Take any worldview. Take any worldview. Find the essence of what makes something what it is. And Krishna's that. You following this? It's a way of when you see something, you see the essence of something, you see like the beauty of something, and the reason, the raison d'etre of anything in the world, you see something of Krishna, who's ultimately the Dharma of the universe. And by looking at this little world around us, we become part of something bigger. Just like by me thinking about how I want to serve Panchatattva, I participate in our tradition, which is thousands of years old. And just like our tradition, which is thousands of years old, gets to the core of human spirituality, of a loving, graceful relationship with God. And you start with the world that you get put into, and you think about it carefully, and you find within that little world that you have access to a doorway. And if you look for the right doorway, and you go through the right doorway, you wind up in a much bigger world. And you sit in the temple, and you become part of a tradition that goes back 500 years, 5,000 years. And you look at that tradition from 500 or 5,000 years ago, and you find it gets to the core of human spirituality. And if you do it right, instead of being caught in your milieu, in your millennium, in your decade, in your body, in your little microscopic world, and thinking that's all there is, which is what happens with the colonialist mentality of looking at other traditions from their own subjective and biased lens. If you do it right, you can actually find the bigger picture. And so although Krishna may be mentioning this within a Hindu milieu, within a Vedic worldview, the idea he's talking about works anywhere for all time. Find the essence of something, what makes that thing amazing, what makes a tree a tree. What makes a tree valuable? You know, for people in the Middle Ages, what made a tree valuable was it produced fruits or flowers. Therefore, the noble trees produced fruits and flowers, and the ignoble trees, they just gave thorns. So that's from the point of view of what it does for human society. You follow? We could go bigger. You know, trees eat carbon dioxide and breathe oxygen, and they're part of what makes it possible for life to live on this planet. I mean, there are anaerobic living entities that don't participate in the carbon dioxide oxygen exchange, and they live in gram zero negative environments, so they're anaerobic. But for most life, that's why if you get a puncture wounds, tetanus is an anaerobic bacteria. It lives in a zero oxygen environment. So if you get a puncture wound, and you don't have access, you know, you want to take a tetanus shot, which is a dumb idea anyway, because by the time you take a tetanus shot, you've already got tetanus, and the tetanus shots only help you if you haven't already been punctured, unless you get tetanus immunoglobulin, which no hospital in California carries. They just give you a prophylactic dose. They don't actually deal with it if it's been injected in your body. But if you get a puncture wound, you want to deal with it quickly, you know what you do? You open it up. You just make your wound bigger. And that brings oxygen to the area, and then you got no problem. You follow? You open your wound up, get some more blood, push on it, open it up. The blood flow will get any like dirt out, but the dirt's not the problem. It's the animal urine that's on the dirt that's the problem. That's how tetanus spreads. How do I know so much about tetanus? So that was a true tangent. The rest of it was all design, but that was a true tangent. And so, if you find the right portal, if you look at the world carefully, you can find beauty everywhere. you find value everywhere. We're in this little tiny world, this little tiny body, doing our little tiny thing. But if you do it right and you look at the trees and you look at things for what they are and you look at the essence of everything, you'll find value in it. And when you find that value, you find Krishna's fingerprint in this world, if the world was indeed created by a creator, by an all-good, all-loving creator. Then the fingerprint of his grace would be everywhere, and you'd be able to find it. You'd be able to find things to be grateful for, things that would connect you to divinity. The world would no longer be a threatening, violent, dangerous place that leads you to hell. It'd be a beautiful place where everything led you to divinity. The Catholics struggled with this. They were big patrons of the arts, but the art was so sensual. Like the Sistine Chapel and stuff like that. It was just so hard for them. The whole idea of God's hand touching man's hand, like the beauty of this world being representative of the beauty of God, it was so difficult because they had this tradition of celibacy and self-abnegation and wearing horsehair shirts and freezing to death and all sorts of stuff that they were like really into as part of their nihilistic, cult of self-abnegation, anti-world cult, because the world was created by the devil. But at the same time, they had to they just wanted to see this beauty in the world and bring it closer to God, and they were these tortured artists all through the Middle Ages who could never quite figure it out. But if you do it right, you don't have to be tortured. You can find beauty everywhere, and you can always move closer to divinity, and you're not this victim of sensualism. The beauty of this world actually reminds you of the beautiful person that created this world. That's the promise of theism. That's why the evidence of God's existence is everywhere for the theist. That's what Arjuna wants to see. And now Krishna, within the milieu, which is comfortable for them, starts rolling through it. We may not know all these things. You might, if you spend long enough as a Hare Krishna, you learn who the Adityas are, you learn who the Maruts are, you learn who Marichi is amongst the Maruts. But if you're not, you can appreciate the principle. And you'll get some of them. Of the Vedas, I'm the Samaveda. The Samaveda amongst the Vedas because it's filled with the most beautiful melodies. What are the Vedas? The Vedas are these incanted texts where you chant. You follow? Ishabosya savam yakincha jagatyam jagat tena taktena bunjita magidha kasya svedanam. They're filled with these beautiful incantations. But the most beautiful of all of them is the Samaveda. It has the most beautiful melodious chants. So amongst the Vedas, which are to be chanted, I'm the Samaveda, which has the most beautiful chants in it. You follow? Of the demigods, I'm Indra, the ruler. Indra was the Zeus of the Vedic pantheon. He was the power broker. He was the big one. So Krishna was the power that was represented by Indra. The king of heaven. Of the senses, I'm the mind that has the ability to control all the other senses. And in living beings, I'm the living force. I'm consciousness within what lives, because that's the defining feature of life. He's like mentioning stuff. Some of it's a little bit archaic and specific to our, to the Vedic worldview, but some of the stuff is pure gold. And even the stuff that seems archaic is easy to extrapolate from and see what he's trying to get to. You guys following this? Of the Rudras, I'm Shiva. There's a bunch of Rudras. Sometimes we call Shiva Rudra. Rudra means roarer. There's a bunch of Rudras in the Veda, and Shiva's one of them. Of the Yakshas and Rakshasas, I'm Kuvera. Of the Vasus, I am Agni. And of mountains, I am Meru. Meru is the centrifugal force, the cynosure of the universe. It's the fulcrum of the universe. Meru is this part of your finger, this part. It's your biggest, strongest finger, and it's the base of it. So when you chant on your fingers, you chant around Meru. When you chant on your beads, the one bead you never cross around and you go back and forth around it is Meru. Also indicating that there's a fulcrum around which everything rotates in life everywhere, and it's represented in both our beads and also the way we chant on our fingers. How cool is that? Of priests, known to be Brihaspati, he's the priest of the demigods versus the priest of the demons. Shukracharya is the priest of the demons, means seminal teacher. Shukra means semen. So Shukracharya is the seminal teacher, meaning that you're born into the teacher caste. You follow? Does that make sense? And so casteism is critiqued because the teacher of the demons is a caste-conscious person. And the teacher of the demigods isn't. Brihaspati. Of generals, I'm Kartikeya. He's the general in charge of the army of the demigods. And of bodies of water, I'm the ocean. We don't worship Kartikeya, but when we do yagyas, normally there's a place where you worship Kartikeya. So we worship Vishvadev, who is an incarnation of Vishnu, who leads, it's like a Kartikeya, but who's actually like an incarnation of Vishnu, as opposed to a demigod. So it's like instead of Ganapati, instead of Ganesh, we worship Narasimha, who removes obstacles. And so as you move into Vaishnavism, you move away from different deities who compete with each other, and you move into different iterations of Vishnu, who are also all Garuda, sometimes also the chief of our army. That also happens. Of the great sages, I am Brigu. Of vibrations, I am the transcendental Om. Of sacrifices, I am the chanting of the holy names. I'm Japa. Yagyai Japa Yagyosmi. Of the yagyas, I'm Japa. And of immovable things, I'm the Himalayas. Of trees, I'm the banyan tree, which doesn't produce fruits per se, but it's just mega amongst the trees. It's a tree of trees. It's a forest in a tree. And of the sages among the demigods, I am Narad. Of Gandharvas, I'm Chitrarata. And amongst perfected beings, I'm the sage Kapila. Of horses, know me to be Uchai Shrava, produced during the churning of the ocean of nectar. Of lordly elephants, I'm Aravata, who's Indra's elephant. And among men, I'm the monarch. I'm the king among men. That was there also in the European system. That's why the kings, they were considered to be ruling by divine right. Of weapons, I'm the thunderbolt. Amongst cows, I'm Surabhi. Of cause of procreation, I'm Kandarpa. I'm lust, the god of love. And of serpents, I'm Vasuki. Of the many hooded Nagas, I'm Ananta. And amongst the aquatics, I'm the demigod Varuna. Of departed ancestors, I'm Aryama. And among the dispensers of laws, I am Yama, the lord of death, the ultimate justice giver. Amongst the Daitya demons, I am the devoted Prahlad, who was born in an atheistic family. Amongst subduers of time, amongst subduers, I am time. That's far out, right? Now we're getting more esoteric. He's starting to throw those in. They're actually scattered throughout. I'm the life of all that lives. Amongst subduers, I am time. I am death, which takes all things away. He's going to do some of that. Then he's going through the Vedic pantheon. He's also going through natural things in the world, immovable objects on the Himalayas. So it's like just straight stuff you see in this world, stuff you see in heaven, principles. It gives you a grab bag of stuff to look at in different categories. Amongst the demigods and the kind of Vedic pantheon, to get that all sorted out and put in order so you don't become a polytheist. In this world, fragrance of the earth, immovable objects, the Himalayas, just stuff you can actually actually just look at, and then principles. Among beasts, I'm the lion. Among birds, I'm Garuda. Of purifiers, I'm the wind. Of wielders of weapons, I'm Ram. Of fishes, I'm the shark. And of flowing rivers, I'm the Ganga. I'm the shark. He must say he's Makara. Yeah. Makara is sort of a mythical fish. I don't want to get into it, but whatever. Shark is good, as good of a definition as Usually it's several animals put together. There's a term for it. It starts with a C. It's a chimera, right? A chimera is an animal made out of multiple animals. And so the makara is sort of like a chimera, yeah, within the water. But it also could be a shark, because the shark has not evolved in millions of years. It's the ultimate apex predator. It's just doing its thing like it's always done its thing, right? Of flowing rivers, I'm the Ganga. Of all creations, I'm the beginning, middle, and end, and also I'm the beginning and the end, and also the middle. Of sciences, I'm the spiritual science of the self, and amongst logicians, I'm the conclusive truth. That's a wild one. I'm logic. I'm the logos. Of letters, I'm the letter A, the first letter. Amongst compound words, I'm the dual compound. I don't want to get into that today, but in Sanskrit grammar, there's multiple compounds. There's karma, dharya, and tatparusha, and bahuvrihi, and dvandva. And dvandva is the basis of all other compound words. Like do not becomes don't. So dvandva is the basic of all compound words where both items have equal value. And so Rama and Krishna is both Rama and Krishna. So it means Krishna and Rama went together somewhere, and you'll just conjugate, you'll just decline the last syllable. So you'll say Rama Krishnau, which instead of saying Ramau Krishnau, both in the dual case, you'll just say Rama Krishnau, and you just have to decline the final suffix. It stands for both words. There's other ones where one of them is an adjective and the other one is the object, like the red coats. That could either be you have a red coat, so the coat is red, where the red is an adjective modifying the word coat, or the red coats could refer to the guy who wears the red coat. And so there's different types of ways when you put two words together into one word, what you're trying to say. Sometimes one of them is more important. Sometimes it's referring to something which isn't actually included in the word red coat. Sometimes one word, coat, is the primary word, the word red is secondary. But in the Dvandva Samas, both words have equal value. Let's keep moving on. I am also inexhaustible time, and of creators I'm Brahma. I am all-devouring death. I'm the generating principle of all that is yet to be. That's another thing you have to deal with. You have to deal with death and getting old and dying and all the bad stuff that happens in the world. If you just say that God's responsible for all the good stuff, you're left with a devil who has to be responsible for all the bad stuff. And so something which is really sophisticated that you see here is that Krishna is also all the bad stuff, and you have to reconcile that too. And it forces you to see the world as truly beautiful, and not just beautiful half the world, and then half of it has to be hung on a devil. Among women, I'm fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. Something here is that amongst women, all the words are feminine. You follow? Ahimsa is feminine. All the words, as Krishna says here, are feminine words. So in Sanskrit, you have both masculine and feminine words like guapo and guapa. So some words in Sanskrit are just feminine. That's how they are. And so all the words here Krishna's saying are feminine words. So he's even including women, unlike, most strains of Christianity. There's a matriarchal thing going on here as well. Of the hymns of the Samaveda, I am the Brihat Sama. And of poetry, I am the Gayatri. Of months, I am Margashirish, the first month, January for Indians. It happens and it's the first month after Kartik, actually. That's why people get married in November, December. It's the first month after Kartik. It happens in November, December because it's the lunar calendar, but it's there January. And so he's getting into different Vedic meters that are chanted. And of seasons, I'm the flower-bearing spring. I'm the gambling of cheats. And of the splendid, I'm the splendor. I'm victory, I'm adventure, and I'm the strength of the strong. O descendant of Vrishni. Of the descendants of Vrishni, I am Vasudev. And of the Pandavas, I am Arjuna. How crazy is that Arjuna is hearing that? Of the sages, I am Vyasa. And amongst the thinkers, I am Ushana. Of the means of suppressing lawlessness, I am punishment, which is the ultimate way you stop somebody from doing something wrong. And of those who seek victory, I am morality. That's a wild idea. That morality actually gives rise to victory. Who wants to be victorious if you can't be moral? of secret things I am silence, and of the wise I am the wisdom. Furthermore, Arjuna, I am the generating seed of all existence. There is no being, moving or non-moving, that can exist without me. O mighty conqueror of enemies, there is no end to my divine manifestations. What I have spoken to you is but a mere indication of my infinite opulences. Know that all opulent, beautiful, glorious creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. What need is there, Arjuna, for all this detailed knowledge? By a single fragment of myself, I purvey and support the entire universe. And so Krishna doesn't limit himself here. He uses this as a springboard to help you in your own ability to find Krishna in this world. Did you guys follow this? And here's the final point. Arjuna was on a battlefield and he stopped to just think about the ultimate big picture. We have to stop sometimes in our life and stop getting caught up in the rat race and in our little world. And we have to use this little world that we're in, and we have to cut through it, cut through history, cut through space and time, look for the thread of continuity, look for the divinity which is hiding there in plain sight, ready to be seen. And we have to pause and see the big picture. And then go back into this world, having been transformed by that experience, and become much more effective and be able to move in this world without becoming implicated in it. The way you do that is by pausing and seeing the big picture. You can look at history. You can look at slavery. You can look at Christianity. You can look at different sects. You can look at different ideas. You can look at the Scala Naturae, and you can find these threads of continuity that pervade all reality without just being a colonialist in need of a good postmodern subjectivist to torture them. And you can actually find out what's really going on in this world. And you can be in your small little blip in time, in your small little place, and you can touch the infinite and make this life truly worth living. And what Krishna does here is he touches that moment of time that's the Vedas, but then expands into the infinite world and time and death and morality and goodness. You follow? And Arjuna goes on that ride with him and finds himself in a much bigger world. Arjuna is now part. Krishna says, and of the Pandavas, I am Arjuna. It's like Arjuna actually finds himself in this greater world too. And that's what we have to do. And so what we find here is not just, they're getting like to the heart of life here. You guys just not get caught up on the details, and you have to see it for what it is, which is a springboard. And so what I did for the whole class is I went off in various directions that A, helps you to appreciate the idea of sacred orders and natural orders and looking for the thread of continuity that ties all things together. Did you follow that? Showing you how you could look at history and the world and everything which happens and see a bigger picture. Did you follow this? So that by the time we got into the text, we wouldn't get lost in it. And we could look at the specifics of our own world, and then other worldviews, and the specifics of our own time, and then other times, and start to see the threads of continuity that run through all of them. So that way, by the time we got to this section, you'd be able to actually feel it in the right way and have it open your eyes and have it paint a picture of a bigger world for you. Did you follow this? So I was trying to give you guys examples of strains that run through history with real live examples in history to take a look at our world and explode beyond our world so that when we encountered the Gita, we wouldn't get caught in the details and we'd be able to see what Krishna was trying to do, which was move from stuff which is right in front of you to stuff which is beyond you, and make the world into a bigger place. Did you guys follow that? Okay, one comment. Tadeo, what do you got for me?
This part of the last points made how Arjuna, being able to see the bigger picture, then found himself in it. It's a very interesting idea for me. I appreciate that.
We have a place in this universe. We have a special thing we can do. We have a reason why we're here. We have lessons to learn that are specific to us. There's something special about you and about me. We get to be a part of something much bigger than ourselves if we want to be. That door is open to that. We just got to go through it. And Arjuna did that. And that's what we have to do. And we got to pause. We got to learn that fine art of pausing and seeing the big picture so we don't drown in the minutia. And so we can find within the minutia something beautiful and bigger than ourselves. Even something beautiful in death. Even something beautiful in suffering. Even something beautiful in growing old. It's like it's the greatest hero's journey. Let's call it with that. Thank you all very much. Haribol.